So thank you. And I apologize, I didn't change this slide either. I had a small emergency in the last half hour. But last week we had Eric Hansen on from Mitel talking about when they were almost out of Chapter 11. They have since come out of Chapter 11. We had a great conversation about what was happening in their world and what they're doing and where they see, and they've got yeah, they're making some major changes, and it was a prepackaged Chapter 11, and they came out of it in less than 90 days, which congratulations to Mitel, and they're back to normal. So very excited about them. A quick famous quote, with over 15 types of foreign cars, sorry, I can't see all of this, already on sale here, the Japanese auto industry isn't likely to carve out a big share of the market for itself. That was Business Week in 1968. I didn't tell Business Week that I owned 7 Hondas in my entire family, including Acuras. So, yeah. So this week we have Robert on again. Thank you, Robert. We're continuing our membership drive. It actually ends at the end of this month. We've got some great success since then and a lot of traction and a lot of great things going on. We've actually, Mike will share in a moment with Fran. We've actually just gotten 2 new members and possibly a third within the last week, right? So
That's correct.
so again, the winner gets a free pass to the annual fall conference, and we'll also have some other smaller follow-up prizes as well for number 2 and 3. But yeah, we're looking at 50% growth in 2025, 250 consultants, but we've already come a long way already. So, Fran, you've got happy hour tomorrow, right? So I'll let you jump in here.
Yep, we have happy hour tomorrow, and as Steve mentioned, we do fireside chats every week. We do happy hour every other week. So this is for members and past members only. We get off topic a lot, but I've learned recently in the last couple days about some hidden talents. So I think we're going to focus on hidden talents tomorrow. So please join us, and remember, just a reminder too, if you haven't gone into the website recently, go in and make sure your profile is up to date, make sure your location is there, all the focus areas, so that if people want to reach out, they know where to find you and what kind of things you're working on. So please update your profiles on the website.
Thank you, Fran. And Fran and I and Mike just got off a call with a prospect, a possible new consultant and her firm, and with potentially even more members. And it was interesting how the 3 of us just rattled off like 12 major benefits of our organization, and most of them being really tangible. So great testimony from all 3 of us, and we'll continue to share those as we go forth, each week. But Dave is traveling today, so Fran's going to pinch hit for Dave today. Go ahead, Fran.
Yeah, Dave asked me. I'm past president on the vendor side. So as far as Dave today, he wants to remind everybody that the VAC Gold speaking slots for the conference are filling up. Please register. The deadline for the original VAC Gold is July 1st, and then things are going to open up to the rest of the VAC Gold. So please make sure that you get your registration in, your speaker registered, and you're ready to go for the conference. We want to make sure we get that slot available to you. So you'll see information available on the website. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and I'll be glad to help. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Fran. All right. And one more, Mike, our president.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to some in the West Coast. Glad to have you. Robert, glad to have you back as a VAC member, and we look forward to your talk today. I just want to remind everybody, please start signing up for the conference. It's really shaping up to be one of the best we've ever had. So get your registration in and get that planned for you in October. So and our recruitment is going great. We just accepted 2 new consultants this week, and we've got a lot of prospects in the hoppers. So Fran's doing a great job. The recruitment committee is doing an outstanding job, and we've got a lot of excitement in that area. So thanks for everybody for joining today, and hope you have a great rest of the week. Steve?
Thanks, Mike. Yep. Thank you, Mike. So again, we've got Robert on this week, and Robert's going to share a whole bunch of material around what he's doing in the space and how we can leverage SaaS. So, Robert, I'm going to give you the share.
Okay. So thank you, and it's good to be back. And before I get started, just wanted to, kind of provide my perspective. So, um, what I do for LDI Connect is I focus on our strategy and kind of product selection and deliverables for not only our unified communications platform and the services that we offer, but also for our managed services portfolio centered around IT. And really, the focus that we have, not really necessarily from a selling perspective, is security has become such a prevalent conversation in what we're talking to our clients about. And that kind of transcends not only what we're doing from an IT perspective, but certainly as from a unified communications perspective, and some other disciplines that we have as an organization, which I'm not going to go into today. But we have a very holistic view to security, cybersecurity, because there are so many devices that are being put on a network today that either are being getting their resources locally, from servers still on site, or the SaaS model, which is growing in leaps and bounds. So I'm not going to tell anyone on this call about the importance of SaaS. A lot of the unified communication vendors that are VAC members, have SaaS platforms. The things that we integrate with, from an AI perspective, a lot of those are SaaS based. And as we think about the development of future technologies and future implementations, and the availability of these types of resources, security has to be part and parcel from a planning perspective. So I think last year when I was on and I talked a little bit about cyber, which is a topic that I talk about frequently, it's changed in the last 12 months. The threat profile has changed, and it's an evolving world. And really what I want to focus on today is SaaS security, which is something that's relatively new. So I was at IT Secure in Orlando about a month ago, and the primary focus was on SaaS security. So I'm not going to get too deep into what I saw there, but hopefully there's some relevance to you folks, as again you're talking to your clients and your prospects about the services and the consultative approach that you can take. This has to be part of your talk track, right? So hopefully there's some nuggets that you can take and that you can share with them as you develop your strategies and your plans going forward. So just do kind of a quick agenda, right? So I'm going to give you an introduction, going to talk about some vulnerabilities, security measures and protections, delivery methodologies, and then some future trends. And I just want to talk about like some of the natural progression, right? When we first talked about like the IT space, and this can translate to probably the PBX space when we were on-prem, right? We had this break fix model. We had this break fix model in IT. Now it became more of a managed service offering. And then, as the MSP world developed, it became more of a managed security posture. So there are MSSPs in the space that include a lot of cybersecurity tools and what they offer. And now we're talking about this next level, which is managed SaaS security, right? And all of these components are important when you talk about an overarching cybersecurity portfolio and a cybersecurity posture. So again, we'll get into some of that information as well.
Great.
So introduction to SaaS security, right? And so I'm going to give you some definitions, kind of what is it? It's really about policies, and those policies also incorporate the technologies that are designed to protect the applications that are, SaaS based, delivered over the internet, right? So if you think about, again, just like think about the technologies that we integrate with. Zoom, it's a SaaS application. Microsoft Teams is a SaaS application. Epic, eClinicalWorks from an EHR perspective. These are SaaS-based applications. Salesforce.com, like all of these things are cloud-based, right? And there's more and more. If you take a look at, I think if you do a study of the amount of applications that people are accessing via the web, if you do a study within an organization, there's probably on average between 25 and 35 applications that they're using that are SaaS based in a small to medium sized business. That number significantly increases when you talk about enterprise, right? So there is so much data that's leaving a facility and going to the cloud and returning that we need to be cognizant of, right? Data protection. How do we protect that data? How do we store that data? How do we prevent against breaches and data loss? And then compliance. Again, at IT Secure in Orlando, a big focus was on compliance. Not only compliance for HIPAA and FINRA and PCI, but additional compliance requirements that are going to be pushed down to and into verticals that might not have needed to adhere to compliance in the past. So that will be an important factor as we move forward. And then how do you build trust? How do you build trust when you maintain that compliance, and what's the point of it? I don't know if anyone's got a letter in the mail from one of your healthcare providers that they have been breached, and they're not sure what of your information was shared on the web, but they're letting you know that you're breached, right? It happens, but when you receive those letters, it doesn't feel good that all of your information is now exposed, to the dark web and to people that want to do bad things with it, right? So again, compliance and trust is a very important factor. I'm not going to educate anyone what the SaaS model in this with this group is, right? But we want to access it over the internet. There's some cost savings we believe in SaaS-based applications. The scalability in a SaaS-based environment versus having physical servers or virtual servers in your environment. You could scale much quickly, but it does raise some security challenges, which are very different than applications that are delivered in a closed model, right? If we think about the traditional client-server environment, it's pretty much closed, right? I have a device that's sitting on a network, and in my local area network that's accessing a server that's on my local area network. I can control, some of that data flow. But in this world, where you're actually going outside of your organization and going into someone else's cloud environment, all bets are off, and it doesn't apply to the same security requirements that what was once traditional. So again, data security, organizations have critical information, sensitive information that must be protected from unauthorized access and breaches, right? So how do we do that? How do we create a data secure environment? How do we deal with compliance issues, right? The vendor reliability, right? These are concerns, when you're looking at SaaS providers, when you guys write an evaluation or you do a spec and you want to introduce and vet out, potential vendors for the people that you represent. These are all questions that should be asked. What is the data security environment? Are they SOC 2? Are they HIPAA? How do they deal with data, and how does it get stored? And what's the architectural design of that data center? Are they N+1? Are they doing microservices? Like what's the security around that data, and how do they allow access in? What are the measures that are put into place? What compliance do they have? What kind of data centers are they in? Are they grade 5? They're grade 4, grade 3? How many variety of multiple vendors do they have from a bandwidth perspective coming into those facilities? And again, identity management, right? This is something a little bit new today than some of the things that we experienced in the past. But how do you put into a practice and manage a practice that are looking at the individual identity of a user? A lot of what we're seeing today from an IT security perspective, and I'll get into this in a little bit, is the breach point has changed. The breach point for a lot of ways was around the device. And that's changed to be more about the user and the user profile. Office 365, if you really think about it, is web-based application, and there were tools that were available from a endpoint perspective that I can lock down a device. But if I breached your Office 365 account and not solely focused on the device, you're talking about token stealing, you're talking about credential stealing. I'm logging in with your administrative rights and looking like you, and it has nothing to do with the device. So the landscape of where breach points is happening is changing. So how you maintain and manage identity is important in the SaaS-based world. Going to go into some vulnerabilities, right? So you got weak authentication issues, right? So you don't really have a strong policy for how users authenticate. Again, if you're using multi-factor authentication, if you're using, kind of different types of tokens, there are people that are going back to physical, right? A USB drive that's connected to a device, which we moved away from, a few years back. But there is a trend to going back to that because token stealing and credential stealing in SaaS-based applications is actually on the rise. again, taking a look at just misconfigured, configurations as it relates to the SaaS applications. How you need to lock these environments down is very different than how we lock down this client server mentality. And then again, just inadequate access controls. Some of these things you need to take a look at. How is that data? What happens when data is compromised? And how do you make sure that there is, integrity from within the organization? And I read an article, I think a couple of months ago, about Copilot, and how, even though when people, access Copilot, and, you could ask Copilot and, variety of questions, and within Copilot, someone gained access to all of the HR records, right? So you think as a user, where normally you wouldn't have access to certain types of shares. If you don't configure Copilot properly, you can actually gain access to information that as a user in an environment you didn't have access to before. So again, that's about access control. That's really about making sure you have the right environment, the right framework, the right permissions, the right policies in place, and those are being managed on a consistent basis. Data leakage, something, it's an exciting phrase, but how is information unintendedly exposed, and how do you make sure that that is protected? The causes of data loss is, again, it goes down to mismanagement of security protocols, and different breach points. I'm being repetitive in some of these areas because I think it's important as you view this is the policies, the procedures, and the ongoing management that are required today are very different than what's been required in the past. And I'm not saying that there weren't requirements in the past. I'm just saying that as we take a look at where the industry is moving us, right, where the trends are sending us, what AI is going to allow us to do. The importance of this is growing, right? So it has to be part of a best practice. It has to be part of a standard operating procedure, conversation that you're having, with clients in the same way that we have it with clients about the way in which these things need to be set up to mitigate these types of risks, because the risk profile, without a doubt, has changed. And then, if you just think about it, go back a second, you have insider threats now, right? So, you have employees that are misusing data. You have contractors that you might be bringing on. You have users that are working remotely. And, think about the trend in the last 5 years, certainly, since COVID, how we work and where we gain access to information, has changed. You have a contractor working either in the US or, overseas, and they are, gaining access to your sensitive data, from their homes, right? And whether that's a company provided device or they're bringing their own device, certainly there are ways to, secure or give them secure access. But again, you have to make sure that, their environment is secure, and, where the potential compromises might come from. Privileges, like how do you define privileges, and what dictates privileges based on, again, geography or the information that they need access to within the organization. And then really this comes down to, we got to get Big Brother, right? We have to really monitor, what's going on with our users, what information they're accessing, and what they're doing with that data. Because again, there was a Microsoft report that stated, last year, I think the amount of, in 2024, the amount of password breaches every minute was around 3,000 to 4,000.
Wow.
This year it's 7,000. The statistic in terms of total GDP for cybercrime revenue, I think in 2023 was just around 8 trillion. In 2024, it was 11 trillion. And just to give you some scale, 11 trillion is larger than most of the European nations. China is about 29 trillion. The United States, I think, is about 34 trillion. So cybercrime as a whole, in terms of revenue and, and making money, is larger than most countries in the world. So, and that's growing. Like, that's not shrinking, that's growing. So again,
Wow.
if you don't think this is real or something we need to be concerned about, statistics show us that it is. And again, just if we think about what we would traditionally do, from a cybersecurity perspective. You know, there's social engineering. We're going after people, right? So there's security awareness training, and really training your staff to understand what different trends are in terms of phishing, right? Phishing is still one of the most prevalent ways that compromises occur. Someone sends you an email, there's a link attached. You don't spend enough time, really reading it, seeing who it's from, making sure if that's accurate. You click on a link, nothing happens, and you go about your day saying, the PDF didn't open. There must be something wrong with Adobe. No, there's nothing wrong with Adobe. You just gave someone access into your environment by clicking on the PDF that didn't open.
Not a bit.
That's what happens.
So Robert, let me ask you just as a general question.
Sure.
What are you counseling
Well,
your customers on?
So, the guidance that we provide is kind of this overall
Tuesday,
strategy. I'm just gonna, can you
after
mute?
we left,
Yeah, I'm trying. They just
yeah.
changed the whole interface recently.
Lynn decided that she didn't like the kind of
Rick,
show.
hold on.
Okay.
I'll find it. Hold on.
That's okay. I guess I must be.
No,
doing
I
a great
wanted to hear
job
what
with-
Rick was saying. It sounded like it was some pretty good dirt.
Yeah. I guess I'm not engaging
Okay,
rich enough, but I apologize.
He's muted. It's good.
Yeah. So really, we take a look at the environment in total, right? So we're really guiding on policy, compliance,
Mhm.
and then really tool set and management. So again, we're the presentation that it looks like the CIO or CTO from Mitel, was around AI and data governance, right? And
Mhm.
so again, that's part of those conversations, because if you really think about what we're trying to achieve, more so now than ever in the history of tech, is introducing an element where different data stores can be pulled from and then presented, in a single pane of glass, right? But if you think about that, I have to go to these different data stores, and I have to do lookups, and I have to extract this data, and then I have to perform the task that is being requested. In addition, I also have to determine what those data stores are, right? So if you just take a look at the AI landscape today, and you have Copilot, and you have ChatGPT, and you have Grok, and you have Claude, and you have Gemini, some of them are intended to be more closed, right? Where you feed the information to it. So I'm giving it frequently asked questions. I'm giving it data sheets. It's more of a closed environment, versus some like Gemini, which is, Google's, which is really the internet, right? It's going out to the internet, but I could teach it, providing it, by providing it with data also. So if you just think about that, not all the data on the internet is true, right? It's not all
Oh,
factual.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, right. So
I tell my wife that all the time. She doesn't look up,
Yeah.
honey, what's the source? Because
and what's the source, right? Because
Yeah.
and that's part of the issue. They call them hallucinations,
yeah,
right? So
yeah, for sure.
so you get this hallucination, which isn't factual, and now you're using that as a data point, which isn't true. So so we're taking a look again, because of the different areas of business that we have to offer. We're really building the security infrastructure first, and then everything kind of gets layered on top of that, because it needs to be secure, right? And all of this technology is going to be wonderful, and it's all about the efficiencies, and all about the the customer experience, and the amount of time and energy we're going to save, and giving our agents more tools, so that they can that they can have a better experience, and then our clients can have better experience, and reduce FTEs and all these wonderful things. But it's got to have an overarching cybersecurity strategy built into it. Because
So again, just to keep on this topic real quick, I know that
Yeah.
you got plenty of slides, but like everybody's got some kind of security policies already. They got some procedures already. So how, like what's the conversation that you would have with a customer about, enhancing their security, or, what would provoke them from using you or any of us as consultants?
Yeah, so I think you have to take it to that next level, right? So, again, if you just take a look at this slide as an example, most people are talking about the two things that are in the yellow box, right? To be honest, from a
Sure.
cybersecurity perspective, they're talking about what exists today. Like, zero trust is not new. It's been around for a bit. But really, the next evolution is really taking a look at the SaaS security environment, and adding that to the practice conversation, right? And really saying, okay, let's really define what SaaS applications you're really using, because most organizations don't know. So I think for you, Steve, if you walked into an environment and you were talking to, one of your potential clients or an existing client, I would do a survey to say, okay, let's really dig into the amount of SaaS applications that you're using, because most people don't really know. They don't know what some of their departments might be using. So I would start there and just do that analysis,
Sure.
and start to dig into, okay, so you're using 42 SaaS applications. Let's start to take a look at the privileges. Let's start to take a look let's start to take a look at those vendors, right?
Mhm.
Do they have SOC 2 compliance? When was it updated? What procedures and policies do they have in place for securing the data that you have, within them?
Mm.
What happens if that SaaS provider, if it's a newer SaaS provider, and maybe, what if they go out of business? What happens to your data? How do you transmit your data that's in their environment to another SaaS provider, if that's
Mhm.
something that needs to occur? So
Sure.
I would start with having the conversations of understanding what they're using,
Mhm.
and really digging into those different, applications, make sure that there's not duplications of those applications, and then, really skinny it down to what do they actually need, right?
Mhm.
Because again, if you just think about what's happened in the last, 5 years, everybody went home, right? They're going to
Right.
use Zoom. You're going to use Zoom. I'm going to use Teams. I'm going to use this application. You're going to use WebEx. They're going to use a little GoTo. Like, just think about the unified communication landscape. A lot of organizations were using multiple applications. Now, think about that from a financial services application perspective, or a healthcare, but the healthcare, different business tools. Um, so again, I would start the conversation by really just understanding what they're leveraging and utilizing, and then kind of layer in the conversation of how to secure that environment going forward. So everyone's different, but like, the idea of not asking about what SaaS applications they're running today is something that you can't do. I would say a year ago, people probably weren't asking what they were using, right? Because they only cared about the things that they can control. But I think this is an area of focus that you as consultants, me as a vendor, these are the conversations that we have in the engagements that we go through in our assessment process, right? So we have a very detailed assessment process when we're, talking to clients, and prospects, and really analyzing and spending time, digging into their current environment, because then we have to architect the right, solution in the same way that you guys do,
Sure.
to make sure we implement and deploy the right technologies to support their environments, and then protect it going forward. Did I
Well said. Thank you.
answer your question? I know I've got there a long way,
Yeah,
but
you could probably go on for another half an hour just
I
on this one
could.
slide, but it's all good though. No, because
Yeah.
this is an area that is very hot, and at the same time, it's another opportunity for all of us as consultants and vendors alike to add this into our portfolio. And how do we do that? So you were again very succinct and detailed at
Yeah.
the same time on this. So that was
And
great.
that's really the the reason why I chose this topic to bring to this
Mhm.
group, is because
Sure.
not to say that some of you haven't looked at this and understand kind of what it is, but kind of my world, I'm blending both of them on a daily basis, right? I'm and I'm actually talking about some other technologies that are part of an overall strategy, but I'm looking at this, and from the perspective of if it's unified communications application, that's SaaS based, it's an application similar to any other data application that's out there. Obviously, it's very different, but I view it from a security perspective the same. And I think if I leave you with one message, so should you. Right, you should be
Hmm.
questioning the IT departments that you're talking to about what their overall strategy is, and what they have in place, and how is it going to be secured, because you're sitting in their world, right? And they
Right.
might understand it from their perspective, but they might not necessarily understand what a Genesis contact center solution looks like, or what a Zoom phone environment looks like, or a Mitel, or or Ben, and what the solutions that he offers. They might not know that, right? And you need to educate them on what those little nuances are, because they're all different,
Right.
right? And kind of transitions into the importance of encrypting data, right? And encrypting that data when it's in transport, right? How do I make sure from point A to point B that it is encrypted in a way that is not vulnerable? And then when it's at rest, how do I make sure that it's secure? And if someone does gain access to the environment, that they don't have the ability to access my data and do something with it, right? So again, you have encryption at rest, and you have encryption in transport. And again, what is the way in which we're going to deliver that data in a secure, encrypted manner?
Right.
Identity and access management, right? There are a variety of tools out in the market that utilize this. I would say about a year, let's call it 12 months ago, maybe 18 months ago, we saw a huge trend in we are, there are EDRs, right? There are these endpoint detection and resolution solutions like the CrowdStrikes of the world, or the Sentinel ones, and they really focus on the device. And the trend that we were noticing, that was with hackers, or these cyber criminals were bypassing the device and really attacking Office 365, and they would gain access. And even though there was malicious behavior going on, with the user, it wasn't happening at the device level, so it went undetected. Right. So now there's like this new identity, ITDRs, right, which are really focusing on where someone is logging in from, right? So you could set these boundaries to say, if I see a login attempt outside of a specific geographic area, I'm gonna raise a flag and say, hey, I noticed that Chuck was in Pennsylvania yesterday, and now he's logging in from Guatemala. Is that right? Is that
He
the
was
right
deported.
thing?
He was deported.
Is that the right thing that's going on? So it could send up a flag. It could also restrict access and and strip credentials, for a short period of time until it's proven positive. Or or I can notice there's a certain type of VPN is being utilized. Maybe Chuck uses a VPN, and a normal VPN, and I noticed that a different type of VPN is being utilized, right? So again, the tool set had to change because where the attack point was occurring changed. So again, it's when you start to take a look at identity. How do I verify identity? How do I make sure that Chuck Vondra is Chuck Vondra and not someone from Russia, right? And what are the tools and what are the criteria that I set up for Chuck to prove out his identity based on his privileges, so he can access the data that he's supposed to be able to access? Again, that moves into the access control. And again, there are best practices depending upon a particular industry that you might be in, and based on certain compliance. But again, from your perspectives, these are at least talk tracks that you should be raising to say, we're going to be deploying this application, who and what and where do they need to gain access to it from, right? And how do we restrict that if someone is traveling outside the country and they're not in a secure environment, and we don't want our data to be at risk. And again, so just just thinking about the things that you should be considering and making sure that are in place. What happens if, what happens if in real time? So again, multiple tools that are looking at every bit of data, every transaction, every login, every access to a particular file, to identify real-time detection. Any tool that you should be using needs to be in real time, and it should have a policy of what to do from an incident response perspective if something is wrong, right? So I notice, again, Chuck is logging in from a location that is not, within Chuck's normal work environment. I am going to, I'm going to restrict his access. I'm going to force him to, change his password. I'm going to force him to re-authenticate. I'm going to force him to do something else with MFA, because I don't believe Chuck, yesterday was here and today he's somewhere else. So again, those are the types of, planning that needs to go into place. And there are things called seams that provide more of that. Like I'll use a telecom phrase, more of a cradle to grave. What happens? Where did stuff happen from the beginning of an incident all the way through? I could see everything that someone did, where they gained access, what they accessed, what IP address. So again, what's that incident response? And how do I make sure that I'm real time monitoring, all these environments? And again, this all goes to minimizing the damage that a cyber criminal can gain access to. Again, some of the tools have the ability to lock down based on behavior, access to certain drives, access to certain files. They can restrict being able to plug a USB, device into your laptop or into your PC. So, again, there's a lot of technology out there, and there's a lot of very good vendors, and a lot of them do very similar things. And similar to unified communication space, you have to pick the best. You have to pick the vendor that makes the best sense for your specific needs and your specific requirements. So, but again, real time, you have to have a plan in place of what to do if something does occur, and then how do we mitigate our risk and the damage that can be happening. That can happen, right? And that might move into more of a how do I protect my data? How do I back up my data? Where is that data store located? And how quickly can I restore the data if something does occur? Right. So again, there are cloud-based security solutions for the same reasons why people move to SaaS. There's a lot of reasons why they move to SaaS-based security solutions. They're scalable and flexible. And then there are the expert services that organizations that provide these solutions offer. The idea that every single organization that's in business today has a CISO on staff, right? So someone that understands a security officer, like you're going to have a security officer or someone that has a deep understanding of cybersecurity policies and incident response management. Is not realistic. Obviously, large entities, financial service entities, big insurance providers, healthcare providers, have these types of staff, but most organizations don't. So having an organization that can provide those services in addition to the tools, obviously is very helpful in the same way that people come to consultants, right, and give them the guidance that they need because they don't have that guidance in-house to determine what they need in their environment, what the best practices are, and how it should be project management and implemented and managed, and what's the right solution that they should provide or they should select based on the industry that they're in and the requirements that they have. So again, similar kind of thing. Multi-factor authentication, you must have it. If anyone in this call is not using multi-factor authentication across the different solutions that you provide, whether it's personal or business, do it tomorrow or do it today. Because again, if you're not having a second layer, at least a second layer of authentication, you're at risk. And I would say don't use your phone without entering in 6 digits. Don't use your face. Use something a little bit stricter, like Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator. At a minimum. Audits, right? So audits, security compliance, and then honestly going forward, maintaining a security posture, and that posture will always change, right? It's ever evolving. So you should again, if you're consulting and you're walking into an environment, when was the last time a security audit was done? What was identified during that audit in terms of vulnerabilities, and what's the organization's plan, and how frequently did they do security audits? Most cybersecurity insurance policies today require some level of audit on an annual basis. They have gotten a lot more in depth in terms of what they were in years past. I can tell you that if someone fills out a cybersecurity policy checklist inaccurately, they say they have something that they don't. In most cases, they are being denied when they actually submit if they have to submit for a claim, right? So the cyber insurance business is getting a lot more strict. But again, audits should be occurring on an annual basis. They should not use their internal IT staff to do an audit, or their current managed service provider. They should use a third party, because most people won't tell them that they have breach points or they have risk if they're their service provider, and certainly anyone internal probably would not raise the flag because they might lose their job. Compliance, again, there's a lot of compliance out there depending upon industry. That is ever evolving as well. The amount of compliance that are being required for certain types of organizations is changing. So again, I would say, hey, if someone's SOC 2, I would say, when was the last time? Yeah, your current SOC 2 certificate, right? Most organizations have to do that on an annual basis and manage it on an annual basis. It's a whole other industry that's being born. This whole compliance, like managed service providers getting into the managed compliance business. So I would again ask those questions, when you're talking to your prospects. And again, what's the plan? What's the current strategy in place? How frequently is that the cybersecurity posture and policies being reviewed, and what changes have occurred on an annual basis. Because again, the threat actors are getting smarter. AI is helping them in the same way that it's helping us. And again, do we need to do something different? If you think about, what was complete in 2015 versus what's going to be complete in 2025, this is just some additional highlights. And 5 years ago, endpoint, security, and event management and cloud application data protection was kind of like the hot topics. Now you've added, some additional components into this list, and it's really around SaaS, right? Specifically SaaS, what we need to focus on, in configuration management. What happens if there's issues from a SaaS perspective? How do we alert on that and take action on it? And then how do we report on those types of incidents? And it's evolving, right? So as I mentioned, $11 trillion. They're smart, right? They are businesses. This is not your nephew sitting in his basement with a hoodie on, with a fast computer dialing into war games. These are very sophisticated, in some instances, country-backed, organizations that are sole intent is to gain access to your environment and steal from you, right? Or in some instances, cause harm to grids, or steal government secrets. But their sole purpose is to get in. And what we have found is they develop scenarios on SMB, because the SMB space traditionally has less policies, procedures, and guidelines in place. They use the SMB market as the minor leagues, right? So they test out, different things, and as they get smarter and learn, they develop that to go enterprise, right? So a lot of organizations, like us, we go enterprise down. These guys are going, in some instances, small business and up, right? Because we can test on you and we can see what you can't do, and really attack and harness their skill sets, in environments that are less sophisticated from a cybersecurity perspective. So they're getting smarter. They're using AI. Again, the different breach points and areas where they can gain access as data gets disseminated across various areas, right? So you could have private data centers, you could have public cloud, you could have private cloud, you can have on-premise data, you have users working in headquarters, you have them working in remote offices, you have them working remotely, and then mobilely, right? So if you just think about that, you have different areas where the data is, and I have multiple areas where I'm accessing the data from. So again, different breach points, now more so than ever. Again, AI is going to change the landscape, both for good and for bad. I think there's some clear-cut advantages in our world of what AI is going to offer, from a deliverable. But you also have to think about, again, where the information is being pulled from. Is it accurate? And then also, because I'm now pulling in data from a variety of places, how do I make sure that the connection to that data is secure? And then when it gets into a repository, that it's being secured as well. And again, I could keep going on. I think it's fair to understand that it's a very prevalent conversation, in certain circles. I think it needs to be an absolutely included conversation, in kind of the worlds that we're in, right? My world crosses over a little bit, but to be perfectly honest with you, most of what we're doing is SaaS, right? Whether it's IT or whether it's security today. So physical security, there's so many of these applications that there's a cloud component. Security camera providers, card access, audio-visual solutions. Even if you take a look at workflow from printers and where they're doing their repositories, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to AWS or it's going to Azure. So, there's multiple devices sitting on the network performing different functions, but the data is being transmitted both internally and externally, and really the focus needs to be on, how do I make sure that data is authentic, and how do I make sure that it's protected, regardless of the means in which the data is generated or accessed. So yeah, understanding vulnerabilities, You got to implement the security measures and kind of, continually review them and audit them. And then you just got to stay informed, right? So I hope I did some of that today. Again, I live this world on a kind of daily basis. So I hope that the perspective
So,
is
so I'm going to put you on the spot here. Okay. So
Yeah.
what I'd like you to do, I'm going to give you a takeaway, a little bit of homework here. Okay. If you don't mind.
Sure.
And I'll share this with the membership. Okay. But what I'd like you to do is put together a quick, key questions list to ask a client,
Sure.
how can we, talk further about this to start the conversation? What are some of the high level questions that, when we're engaged with a client or a prospect, what are some of those high level questions that we can ask them to start the conversation? And maybe even create, a list of, possible check items,
Sure.
pulling from this particular presentation and your knowledge, Robert, because
Yeah, happy to do it.
yeah, I think that kind of thing would be, huge for our members, and again, another member benefit, and access to you, of course, in LDI, so which is great. Okay, cool. Does anybody have any questions for Robert? We still have a couple of minutes left. I think you've stunned us all there, Robert. Ben, you have a question there?
No, just good job, Robert. Good
Thank you,
information.
Ben.
Okay, Mike, do you have any questions or no?
No, this is fascinating. I think it's something we all need to be aware of and appreciate the information and look forward to more conversations. Robert, thanks.
Yeah, so Robert, once you put that together, I'll send it to all the members, all the vendor members and consultants if you'd like. Or you
Great.
tell me where, how do you want to share it, and we'll share it, okay? Because this is just great
Yeah.
material, and
Yeah.
you have to be knowledgeable about it. We've had other topics on this, but this really outlines it very well. So and I didn't fall asleep, and yet it's one of those topics that you could.
And Robert,
I'm
look
not-
forward to seeing you at the annual conference. So,
Absolutely, Michael. I'm sure a couple of other people fell asleep, but that's okay. I can't see them. I only see four people on the screen. Everybody else was
Right.
awake.
No, it's all good. Hey, so
All right.
so with that, we'll conclude like a couple of minutes early today, unless we have any other questions. And Robert, thanks for pulling this together. Great information, and we'll follow up together, you and I, and we'll get a Q&A piece out for everybody. Okay.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you
Robert.
so much.
Everybody.
Okay.
thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Yep.
See you
All
all.
right.
No, yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.